let's talk about what's really messing up your grades. And it's something that I hear multiple times a week from students that I work with. And if you're good at homework, but you're still bombing your tests, there's a solid chance that you've told yourself one of these things at some point. I'm just not a good test taker. I am not smart enough. I study and it just doesn't work. The teacher is unfair. The test is unfair. Or I have ADHD, so tests are just harder for me. And look, some of those might have a teeny tiny grain of truth to them, but none of those are the real problem. The real problem is a false belief that almost every single struggling student falls for without even realizing it. And here it is, that doing your homework and studying are the same thing and have the same effect. They are not even close. And it is that one misunderstanding, confusing completing things as learning or studying, is behind almost every case of nailing homework and bombing tests that I have seen in 20 years of working with students. But once you see how false this belief is, how dangerous it can be, and how to swap that approach with something that works a bazillion times better, school gets easier, grades improve, everyone's happy, there's no more drama, your parents and teachers aren't like meh, and that, my friends, is what this video is all about. Hi, I'm Katie Azevedo of schoolhabits.com. I'm a private study skills and ADHD executive function coach who teaches students and professionals to learn and work smarter. I have a master's degree in special education. I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I've personally coached over 3,000 students one-on-one. And I say all of that just so you know that I have seen it all. Please subscribe and find me on Instagram at schoolhabits. Say hi in the comments. Okay, so here is a scenario. I want you to think about this. You do your homework every week. You complete your assignments. You participate, kinda, in class. You generally feel like you understood the material. And then you get your tests back and it is just a completely different story. And if this is happening to you, I want you to know something important. And I don't know if anyone has ever told you before, so maybe I'm the first. You're not bad at tests. In fact, I argue there is no such thing as a bad test taker. Yes, I'm talking to you, the person who thinks there is such a thing as a bad test taker. You're not bad at school. And you're definitely not dumb, but something is going wrong. And I'm gonna tell you exactly what it is and what to do about it. Okay, so this is one of the most common problems I see in the students I work with, and it's also honestly one of the most demoralizing, because when you're doing everything you think you're supposed to be doing, you are showing up to class, you are completing your work, you are paying attention in class, again, kind of, and you're still getting wrecked on tests. It's hard not to think that you're the problem. And it's hard not to think that everybody else knows something that you should know. But that is not what's up. You are simply missing a critical piece that is not talked about enough. But here I am with my microphone. All right, let me explain. The first thing you need to understand is that homework and tests measure completely different things. And you probably haven't thought about it this way before. When you do your homework, you're usually in a familiar and a comfortable environment. You can take as much time as you need. You can use your notes and your resources to work through the problems and to get the answers. And you can Google it, you can AI it, whatever. This is all good and fine because homework isn't about proving to anybody else what you know. All right, it's designed to reinforce what you learned in class and to give you a chance to practice whatever the heck it is that you're learning. So think of it this way. Homework rewards completion and familiarity. Familiarity. But tests are completely different. Tests and quizzes measure what you can recall and what you can apply without any help at all. You're expected to retrieve information from your memory and apply it, often in new ways, in different contexts and different questions that you haven't seen before. There is no looking at your notes, checking your slides. There's no Googling or AIing things to check your, do we say that? AIing thing? Whatever. AIing things to check your answers. Tests are rewarding recall and application. That's a difference, right? And it's that difference between completion and familiarity versus recall and application that explains why you do okay on homework, but not on tests. Like it or not, this is what's going on. I know it's not a convenient truth, but that's what's happening now. Why is this going on? That right there is the real question. There are 6 reasons why you're acing your homework but still struggling on tests, and we're gonna cover all 6. Now, reason number 1, you're doing homework for completion and not for comprehension. Again, homework is designed to reinforce what you're learning in school. It is a chance to practice on your own and build what was covered in class. But we all know it's really, really easy to get away with just phoning it in or putting in barely enough effort just to get credit for the assignment, right? Maybe you copy an example from the post-it notes, you just look up the answer, you ask AI, why? None of this is technically wrong, but it doesn't build the kind of memory that you need to do well on the test. It's part of the reason why you're so confused about why your test grades are what they are and don't match how smart you are. So when you use your notes or your other resources to complete your homework, you're only supporting your short-term comprehension of the material. This is going to help you get the homework questions right and done. But to do well on tests, you need to go deeper. You have to be able to answer questions without looking at your notes and without looking at your resources. Is that harder to do? Absolutely, but that's how it goes. If you never practice without looking things up, you're gonna have this false sense of security and confidence before the test, and that honestly is what's so dangerous. The solution is to honestly try to learn the material when you're doing your homework, not just get the answers. What matters more is how well you're actually learning the content, and not embracing this truth is not embracing reality. Reason number 2, homework doesn't require retrieval. When you're doing your homework or your classwork, you can just find the answer, or you can just look up how to do it, and that is good for the early stages of learning, but you're not getting enough practice retrieving the information basically out of thin air. Retrieval, also called recall, we talk about active recall here on the channel a lot, that is the process of pulling information from your memory without any help, cues, notes, resources, anything like that. On the other hand, recognition is what happens when you're doing your homework with your resources in front of you and you think to yourself, oh yeah, I know that, I remember that. Retrieval and recognizing something as looking familiar are not the same thing. They're not even related. So if you never test yourself while you're doing your homework problems or your questions, you are skipping the most important step in learning, which makes your test grades junk. Reason number 3, homework is honestly just easier than tests. Professors teach something in class and then the homework is just more of the same concept, and when you sit down to do your homework, nothing is that unfamiliar because you just covered it a few hours ago. Tests are different. When professors design assessments, they usually take the concepts that you've learned in class and they twist them just a little bit. That's how it's supposed to work. You might see a problem that looks kind of close to what you did for homework, but some detail has changed, or you're being asked to apply that skill in a new context. This might be annoying, but it's honestly what assessments are supposed to do. They're supposed to test your ability to apply what you know and not just regurgitate it. So my point, even if you get all of your homework questions correct, that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the material. In most cases, it means nothing. It just might mean that you've learned how to follow a pattern. Real comprehension is when you can take a concept that you've practiced, you can apply it to a new situation without any help. That's what homework doesn't usually test you on. All right, reason number 4, you're not studying the way the test is going to test you. So if your test is going to ask you to solve problems, fill in diagrams, or write short response answers, then just rereading your notes or doing some general homework problems over and over again, that's not going to cut it. You need to practice in the same format that the test is going to ask you to perform. Think of it this way. If you prepared for a soccer game only by practicing penalty kicks, you're going to have a pretty rough time during the actual game. The best way to prepare for a soccer game is to play a soccer game. And that same concept applies to studying. If you only ever study by reviewing material, looking at it, rereading it, generally, you're gonna struggle when your exam asks you to do something with the material. So you gotta make sure that the way that you study, so your study methods, match how you're gonna be tested. Reason number 5, you're underestimating the impact of time pressure and stress. When we're doing homework, we're usually in a quiet and familiar place. We are comfortable. We can take breaks, but testing conditions are completely different. You're being timed, you're surrounded by other stressed out students, and other people's stress is really contagious. You're probably sitting in an uncomfortable chair in a cold room, and you know that your grade is on the line for real. And it's this combination of pressure and time pressure too that creates a stressful cognitive environment. And stress does destroy our performance. When we're stressed, the same part of our brain responsible for working memory, the part that we need to answer test questions correctly by pulling things from our working memory, it just completely gets hijacked by fight or flight responses. And that's a whole neurochemical thing. We can't deny that that's what's happening. That's why you can know something cold before the test and then go completely blank during it. You have to practice in slightly stressful conditions. You have to time yourself, do it with putting your notes away, putting your phone away. The more comfortable you are with being uncomfortable, we call this frustration tolerance, the less that pressure is going to be able to control you when you're sitting down to take a test. All right, last one, reason number 6, homework builds short-term familiarity, but tests measure long-term mastery. When you work on homework assignments right after class, the material is fresh in your mind. It is still floating around our temporary working memory. And this, I guess, is really helpful for answering questions correctly in the short term, but it gives us a really false sense of security. We don't want that. Having information so fresh in your mind is why you can finish your homework feeling confident and like you already know everything and you're ready for the test, but being familiar with something is not the same as truly knowing it. We have covered that. Once that information fades from our working memory, we won't be able to answer questions that require us to apply that information because we don't have access to it anymore. The real test of learning is whether you can remember and apply what you've learned days after you learned it, without notes, without resources, without anything at all in front of you. That's what tests measure, not what's floating around in our short-term, very temporary memory from class this morning. The solution here is spaced repetition. Spacing out your study sessions over several days, honestly, over several weeks is the best way to do it. You don't always have that luxury, but that's what you want to shoot for. And then leaving longer gaps in between your study sessions so that you're checking your ability to retain information over time, kind of letting the information fade from your working memory between each study session. You want to like low-key forget what you've learned. No study system is complete without the combination of active recall and spaced repetition. And if you're doing anything other than that, you're not actually studying. You're just relying on that familiarity and temporary short-term memorization. And that right there, my friends, is the issue. Now, there is a fix to all of this, I promise. But know this first. This pattern, this doing everything you think you're supposed to do and still getting wrecked on tests, that has a cost that honestly goes way beyond grades. I know what hurts the most in the moment is the grades, but it goes past that. Over time, it's convincing you that you're not smart enough and that studying doesn't work for you and that the school is, just harder for you than it is for everyone else. And when you tell yourself that story long enough, it affects everything about everything. It affects your confidence going into tests, your willingness to try new things, your motivation, your belief in what's actually academically possible for you. But none of this is true. You are not bad at tests or bad at school. You've simply been approaching the whole dang thing in a way that was never, ever gonna work. And unfortunately, nobody told you that. But here I am. Don't shoot the messenger. So you kept doing probably more of the same thing and wondering why you were getting more of the same negative results. Meanwhile, opportunities are passing you by. Your GPA keeps telling a different story than your actual intelligence tells you. College options, scholarships, internships, those are going to students who figured out the system. I hate that it works that way, but it does. Believe me, when I tell you that those students are not smarter than you, or that they have access to something that you don't have access to, no, it is because they have a completely different approach to, dare I say it, the game. And I want to tell you about a student, okay, that I worked with, because this is literally a perfect example of everything I just said. This kid was so, I'm not going to use his name. I'm just going to call him a kid. Okay, but anyway, this kid was so obsessed with his grades and the status that he thought grades gave him that he used AI on practically every single homework assignment. And he thought he was beating the system. I love this kid so dearly, and he knows that I think this about him, and I know it. We've had this conversation, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, right? But he thought he was beating the system because his homework grades look like sick, like a 10 out of 10 every time. And look, there is a time and a place to use AI to help you understand something when you're doing your homework, but not to actually do the homework for you. Every single test that this kid took before he started working with me, obviously, he failed. And I'm not saying he got a 74, I'm saying 60s or below, an actual fail. In the beginning of our work together, he literally could not see the connection between how he was handling his homework and what he was getting on tests. That connection was just not there for him at all, not computing. And it took a lot of work on my part to make that point land and to convince him to change his approach. But he did. And honestly, it made his homework a little harder, and it took him a little bit longer to do because he had to actually think about it and face the reality that he wasn't understanding things. Then he had to go and figure that out. But he started passing his tests, and he was way less stressed and way less dramatic about tests because his whole vibe going into it was I'll be fine. I get it. And the only thing that changed in this entire equation was his approach to homework. All right, so now you understand why this is happening. Let's talk about what you can do. 4 strategies. First, do your homework to learn. Don't just do it for completion credit. Approach your homework like it's a study session. Explain your answers out loud. Write short little summaries of the sections that you're reading. Think about what you're doing and why, not just about trying to find the answer. Second, practice active recall while you're doing your homework. It's fine to reference your notes and to look things up when you're doing your homework. That's the whole point, but practice trying at least some of your homework without looking at your notes. Covering up your answers to see if you can retrieve the information without peeking. You can try to get through as much of a problem as possible without checking the example from class, the more you practice retrieval, the more deeply you're going to learn the material and the less you're actually going to have to study for the test. Third, create testing conditions at least once or twice before a big exam. So time yourself answering questions, remove distractions, attempt to do your work without referencing any information at all. This isn't about torturing yourself. It's about learning to tolerate that discomfort without freaking out and giving up and falling back into the false belief that you're just bad at tests and bad at school. And fourth and finally, and this one is non-negotiable, space out your study sessions. Repetition is key to learning. To learn something well enough to perform on a test, we need to review that material multiple times over several days, ideally several weeks, giving yourself time in between each session to literally forget the material so that you can retrieve it and strengthen it again at your next study session. We do not study something once and move on. That doesn't work. Our brains don't work that way, even if that truth is inconvenient. Now, so those 4 tips that I just gave you, they work. As long as you use them. You can't just nod along and be like, okay, and not do them. If you do them, they work, but it's not the full picture. Each one of those strategies depends on something else being in place first. Like you can't space out your study sessions if your time management system doesn't allow you to build review time into your real schedule. And you especially can't do that if you don't have a time management system to begin with. You can't practice retrieval and active recall from your homework if your notes are disorganized mess or you don't have any notes at all, and you can't even find what you're supposed to be retrieving from. You can't do your homework to actually learn the material if you don't know how to take notes worth anything in the first place, and you can't create testing conditions if your task management system isn't even telling you that there's a test coming up in the first place, or if you don't have a task management system at all and you're still relying on your school portal, which is breaking news, not designed for you. It's designed for teachers. It's literally designed for teachers. They post the work and you submit it. That's why they call it a portal. It's like things go in and things go out, but there's no way for you to manage anything in there. The 4 tips are not 4 separate things. They're all connected. And when you're missing just even one, the whole dang thing doesn't work, which is exactly why most students try 1 or maybe 2 of these strategies. They see limited results and then they give up altogether. It's not that these strategies don't work. It's not that the kid isn't trying. It's that they only work when they're connected as part of a larger ecosystem, an academic operating system, if you will. And that's exactly what School Habits University does. School Habits University teaches you all 6 skills: task management, time management, note-taking, annotating, study skills, and organization in the right order. So you naturally go from learning something from your homework to getting a good test score because you truly, honestly, for once, knew what you were doing. Module 5 in School Habits University specifically is where I teach you the FOMSO 5-step study framework that shows you exactly how to do this. And if you want live support while you're building out all your systems, the signature tier comes with monthly coaching calls with me, live coaching for a full year. You can ask me anything, you can get live feedback, we can just hang out on Zoom all in real time. The link is in the description box. Go check it out. But here's what I want you to take away from this video. Homework and tests measure completely different things. That is by design. Homework rewards familiarity and completion, and tests reward recall and application. If you've been treating your homework like a box to check rather than a learning opportunity, ooh, that sounds so cheesy, learning opportunity, I don't care. Your test grades are gonna keep telling you about it. But more importantly, knowing what to do is not enough. You need a student operating system that makes the right approach just happen naturally and easily and consistently, even on the days when you'd rather literally be doing anything else. That system exists. I built it. It's called School Habits University, and the link is in the description. If you found this video helpful, subscribe and say hello in the comments. I appreciate you, and thanks so much for watching.